The morning sky over Geneva shimmered with an otherworldly aurora as the massive vessel descended through Earth's atmosphere. The ship was a marvel of crystalline architecture, its golden hull catching sunlight like a jewel, casting rainbow reflections across the Swiss mountains. For the first time in human history, the Celestial Empire had graced a lesser world with their presence. Marcus Reed adjusted his tie nervously as he stood among the welcoming committee on the tarmac of the hastily converted airport. As Earth's cultural liaison officer, he'd spent months preparing for this moment, studying what little was known about celestial customs and protocols. Unlike the military officials and politicians surrounding him, Marcus wore no uniform or expensive suit, just a simple charcoal blazer and khakis. He preferred to let his work speak rather than his appearance. The ship's boarding ramp extended. With a sound like singing crystal, golden light spilled forth, and with it came the most breathtaking figure Marcus had ever seen. Empress Zara Nethys stepped into Earth's sunlight. With the grace of a goddess and the bearing of absolute power, her skin held an iridescent quality, shifting between pale gold and silver depending on the angle of light. Her hair flowed like liquid starlight, and her eyes, those eyes were the color of nebulous, deep purple shot through with silver stars. She wore robes that seemed woven from aurora itself, changing colors as she moved. A crown of what looked like crystallized light rested upon her brow. But it wasn't her beauty that made Marcus catch his breath, it was the way she looked at everything around her with such obvious disdain, as if Earth and everyone on it was beneath her notice. Empress Zara Nethys of the Celestial Empire, announcer Herald, a tall, ethereal being whose voice carried impossible harmonics, ruler of 1,000 worlds, keeper of the stellar throne, she who commands the very stars. Ambassador Chen Wei, a distinguished woman in her 50s, stepped forward and bowed deeply. Your Imperial Majesty, on behalf of Earth and all humanity, we welcome you to our world. We are honored by your presence. Zara's gaze swept over the assembled humans like she was inspecting insects. When she spoke, her voice was melodious yet cold, carrying an accent that spoke of worlds beyond Earth's imagination. I accept your quite welcome, though I must say your world is smaller than I expected, more primitive. Marcus felt his jaw tighten at the casual insult, but he remained silent. Several politicians shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond to such brazen condescension. We hope you'll find our hospitality adequate, Your Majesty, Ambassador Chen replied diplomatically. We've prepared our finest accommodations, and I'm sure whatever you consider finest will suffice for the duration of my stay. Zara interrupted with a wave of her jeweled hand. I trust you've prepared the tribute ceremonies. I have a busy schedule welcoming new worlds into our empire. The slip wasn't lost on anyone present, least of all Marcus. He watched as Zara's entourage, beings of various alien species, all bearing the same air of superiority, began unloading ornate containers and what looked suspiciously like surveillance equipment. As the procession moved toward the waiting vehicles, Marcus found himself assigned to Zara's transport. He climbed into the luxurious limousine, sitting across from the Empress, who was already examining a holographic display showing Earth's major cities. Tell me, she said without looking up, what is your function, human? I'm Marcus Reed, Your Majesty. I'm here to help you understand our culture and customs during your visit. Now she did look up, and Marcus felt the full weight of those stellar eyes. Culture, customs? She laughed, a sound like silver bells mixed with winter wind. How adorable. You speak as if your species has been spacefaring for more than a few decades. What could you possibly have developed that would interest the Celestial Empire? Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he kept his voice level. Perhaps you'd be surprised. Your Majesty, we may be young as a species, but we've created things your empire might find unique, such as? The question was delivered with the tone of someone asking a child about their finger painting. Music, Marcus said simply. Art, literature, the capacity for growth and change, love. Zara's expression flickered for just a moment, surprise, curiosity, before returning to its mask of cool superiority. Love? You mean the chemical reactions that drive your reproduction? How efficiently? Biological? No, Marcus said quietly. meeting her gaze directly for the first time. I mean the choice to put someone else's happiness before your own. The decision to stand with someone even when it costs you everything. The ability to see potential in someone that they can't see in themselves. Something shifted in Zara's eyes. So briefly Marcus almost missed it. But then her companion, a snake-like being with scales that shifted color, leaned forward and whispered something in her ear in a language that sounded like musical mathematics. Nyx reminds me that we have more important matters to discuss than primitive emotions, Zara said. But her voice lacked its earlier bite. Tell me about your military capabilities instead. I'm not military, Your Majesty. I'm just a teacher. She finished, and there was something almost thoughtful in her tone. Yes, I can see that. How quaint. The limousine pulled up to the United Nations building, which had been transformed into a temporary palace for the Empress. Golden banners bearing the Celestial Empire's symbol, a stylized galaxy, with a crown at its center, flew alongside Earth's flags. The contrast was striking, humanity's simple symbols, next to the elaborate displays of galactic power. As they exited the vehicle, Zara paused and looked at Marcus, with an expression he couldn't quite read. This love you speak of, she said quietly, ensuring her entourage couldn't hear. Does it make your species stronger or weaker? Marcus considered the question seriously. Both, he admitted. It makes us vulnerable, yes, but it also makes us willing to fight for things bigger than ourselves, to sacrifice for others, to become better than we thought we could be. Zara was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to decode a particularly complex equation. Interesting, she murmured. Perhaps this world has one or two things worth studying after all. As they entered the building, Marcus caught sight of the Empress's reflection in the glass doors. For just a moment, her imperial mask had slipped, revealing something he hadn't expected to see in the eyes of a galactic conqueror: loneliness. The thought occurred to him that perhaps this arrogant Empress, ruler of 1,000 worlds, had never experienced the one thing her vast empire couldn't: provide genuine connection with another soul. The realization should have made him pity her. Instead, it made him curious. The war room beneath the UN building hummed with tension, as thick as the recycled air. Marcus stood beside a holographic display showing Earth's major population centers, each one now marked with the Celestial Empire's monitoring stations. In just 3 days, Empress Zara had managed to position herself as not a guest, but an occupying force. She's treating this like a conquest, Captain Torres muttered, his weathered face creased with frustration. The security chief had spent decades protecting world leaders, but he'd never dealt with someone who casually demanded access to military installations, as if it were her divine right. Marcus watched the tactical display with growing unease. It's more subtle than that. She's not taking control, she's making us give it to her. Every request sounds reasonable until you realize what you've agreed to. Ambassador Chen Wei entered the room, looking exhausted. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and her usually perfect composure showed cracks. The Security Council meeting was a disaster. She didn't just reject our proposals for mutual cooperation, she laughed at them. Literally laughed. What did she say? Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. That we're like children playing at civilization, that our governments are too fragmented, too emotional to be trusted with real decisions. She's offering to streamline our leadership structure. Chen's voice carried barely contained anger. She wants to appoint regional governors, celestial governors. Captain Torres's hand instinctively moved to his sidearm. That's not a diplomatic visit, that's preparation for occupation, which is exactly what I told her, Chen said. Do you know what she said? Captain Torres, your passion is admirable but misguided. You'll understand soon enough that resistance only prolongs suffering. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd spent hours with Zara over the past 3 days, serving as her cultural guide through Geneva. He'd shown her art galleries where she'd dismissed human creativity as charming but primitive. He'd taken her to concerts where she'd analyzed the mathematical patterns in Mozart, while completely missing the emotion. He'd watched her taste Earth food with the air of someone sampling interesting, but ultimately inferior cuisine. But there had been moments, brief flashes, when her mask slipped, When a child's laughter in the park made her pause. When an elderly couple holding hands caused her to study them with something approaching wonder. When Marcus explained the concept of sacrifice, and she'd listened with an intensity that suggested she was hearing something entirely new. There has to be something we're missing, Marcus said. Some way to reach her that doesn't involve military confrontation. Reach her. Torres laughed bitterly. Reed, she's not some misunderstood alien princess from a fairy tale. She's a conqueror. The only thing she understands is power. Marcus was about to respond when his communicator chimed. The message was brief but commanding. Your presence is required in the Imperial Suite. Immediately. Next, the elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than usual. Marcus tried to prepare himself for whatever new demand or insult awaited him. But nothing could have prepared him for what he found. Zara stood on the balcony overlooking Lake Geneva. Her Aurora robes replaced by something simpler, a flowing gown that shifted between silver and deep blue. Her crown was gone, her starlight hair flowing freely in the evening breeze. She looked almost human. You're late, she said without turning around. I came as soon as I received the message. Your Majesty. Zara, she corrected quietly. When we're alone, you may call me Zara. Marcus blinked in surprise. In 3 days. She'd never offered such informality to anyone. Is everything all right, your Zara? She turned then, and Marcus saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Uncertainty. Tell me about marriage, she said abruptly. Marriage? The bonding ceremony I observed in your historical records. 2 individuals choosing to bind their lives together permanently, regardless of practical benefit. I've studied it, but the logic escapes me. Marcus moved to stand beside her at the balcony railing, careful to maintain respectful distance. It's not about logic. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be better than you are. Someone whose happiness becomes more important than your own comfort. But why bind it with ceremony? Why make it permanent? In the Celestial Empire, partnerships are arranged for genetic compatibility or political advantage. When they no longer serve their purpose, they dissolve. Because, Marcus said, choosing his words carefully, the best things in life require commitment. They require believing in something bigger than immediate gratification. Love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day. Zara was quiet for a long moment. I have ruled for over 2 centuries, she said finally. I have commanded fleets that could shatter stars. I have seen the birth and death of civilizations. But I have never, she trailed off, never what? Never chosen anything for myself, she whispered. Every decision, every action, every thought has been in service to the Empire. I was bred for leadership, trained from birth to see everything in terms of conquest and control. Marcus felt his heart skip. This wasn't the arrogant empress speaking, this was someone breaking under the weight of unimaginable responsibility. That sounds incredibly lonely. Loneliness is inefficient, she said. But her voice lacked conviction. Emotional attachments create vulnerabilities. They cloud judgment, or they give you something worth protecting, Marcus countered gently. Something that makes all the power and responsibility meaningful. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Marcus saw past the stellar eyes to the woman beneath. Your people will resist us, she said. They're already planning it. I can see it in their faces, hear it in their voices. Yes, they will. His honesty seemed to surprise her. You don't try to deny it. Would you believe me if I did? Besides, you're right. Humans don't accept domination well. We're stubborn that way. Stubborn, she repeated, almost smiling. Is that what you call it? Among other things, we also call it free will, the right to make our own choices, even bad ones, even catastrophically stupid ones. Sometimes, like resisting a power that could destroy you without effort. Marcus met her gaze steadily, like refusing to give up what makes us human, no matter the cost. Something shifted in Zara's expression, respect, perhaps, or recognition. You're not afraid of me, she observed. No, Marcus admitted. I should be. Anyone with sense would be. But when I look at you, I don't see a conqueror. I see someone who's forgotten what it feels like to have a choice. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of evening wind across the lake. When Zara spoke again, her voice was barely audible. What would you choose? She asked. If you were me, the question hung in the air like a challenge, and a plea rolled into one. Marcus realized that this might be the first time in centuries that the Empress of 1,000 Worlds had asked someone else's opinion, not as a formality, but because she genuinely wanted to know. "I'd choose to remember," he said finally. "That power without compassion isn't strength, it's just cruelty with a crown." As if summoned by his words, Nyx appeared at the balcony entrance, their scales shifting to agitated crimson. "Empress, the fleet commanders request immediate consultation. There are reports of resistance movements forming in several Earth cities." Zara's mask slammed back into place so quickly, Marcus almost wondered if he'd imagined the vulnerable woman of moments before. "Of course there are," she said coldly. "Inform the commanders that I'll address this personally tomorrow. It's time these humans learned the cost of defying the Celestial Empire." But as she swept past Marcus toward the door, she paused and whispered so quietly only he could hear, "I'm sorry." The words hit him like a physical blow, because he realized she wasn't apologizing for what she'd already done. She was apologizing for what she was about to do. The emergency session of Earth's combined leadership took place in a bunker 200 feet below Geneva, behind blast doors that hadn't been opened since the last World War. The room buzzed with barely controlled panic as reports flooded in from around the globe. Elena Vasquez, Earth's chief negotiations specialist, stood before a wall of screens showing protests in major cities. Her dark eyes flashed with the kind of intensity that had made her legendary in diplomatic circles. London, Tokyo, New York, Moscow, the pattern is identical. Celestial forces moving to maintain order while Empress Zara issues ultimatums about immediate governmental restructuring. General Hayes, a grizzled veteran with silver hair and scars that told stories, leaned forward in his chair. "It's a classic occupation strategy, just dressed up in prettier language. She's not negotiating anymore, she's dictating terms." Marcus sat in the corner, still reeling from the previous night's conversation with Zara. The woman who had shown him vulnerability and doubt had vanished, replaced by the cold Empress, who had announced that Earth's governments had 24 hours to accept imperial guidance or face the consequences of continued chaos. "What's our military assessment?" Elena asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't be encouraging. "Grim," Hayes replied bluntly. "Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. One of their escort ships could level a continent. A direct confrontation would be suicide. Then we don't confront them directly." Captain Torres interjected, "We make occupation so costly they'll reconsider." "Guerrilla warfare against a galactic empire." Elena shook her head. "That's not resistance. That's prolonged suicide." Marcus finally spoke up. "There might be another way." All eyes turned to him. He felt the weight of their desperation, their hope, and his own growing understanding of what might be Zara's greatest weakness. "She's not as unified in her convictions as she appears," he said carefully. "There are cracks in her certainty, moments when she questions her own methods." "You think we can turn her?" General Hayes sounded skeptical. "Convert a galactic empress to our cause." "Through the power of friendship, not convert," Marcus said. "Remind her, she told me herself, that she's never made a choice for herself, only for the Empire. What if we gave her a reason to choose differently?" Elena leaned forward, her negotiator's instincts engaged. "What kind of reason?" Marcus hesitated, knowing how his next words would sound. "She's lonely, incredibly, profoundly lonely. She rules 1,000 worlds, but has no one who truly knows her. No one who cares about Zara the person rather than Zara the Empress. So what are you suggesting?" Torres asked. "That you seduce her into sparing Earth?" "I'm suggesting," Marcus said quietly, "that we show her what she's never had, what her empire can never give her. Genuine connection, unconditional acceptance, love." The room fell silent. Then General Hayes laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Son, you're talking about the most powerful being in known space. She could obliterate our planet with a thought, which is exactly why this might work." Marcus insisted. "She's used to people fearing her, obeying her, trying to manipulate her. But no one has ever simply cared about her well-being, not the Empire's well-being, not her strategic value, but her." Elena studied him with the sharp attention she usually reserved for treaty negotiations. "You're falling for her." "It wasn't," A question. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he didn't deny it. Maybe, but more importantly, I think she might be falling for the idea of being loved rather than feared. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the bunker. Emergency broadcasts filled the screens. Celestial forces were moving on government buildings worldwide. The ultimatum period had been shortened. She's accelerating the timeline, Torres said grimly. Something spooked her. Marcus's communicator chimed with another summons to the Imperial suite. As he headed for the elevator, Elena caught his arm. "Read," she said quietly, "if you're right about her having doubts, then someone is pushing her to act. Find out who." The elevator ride to the surface felt like ascending from the grave. Marcus emerged into a world transformed. Celestial ships hovered over every major building, their golden hulls casting everything in an eerie twilight. Citizens moved through the streets in confused clusters, unsure whether to flee or submit. In the Imperial suite, Marcus found chaos barely contained by protocol. Alien officers spoke in rapid, musical languages, while holographic displays showed Earth's military installations being systematically neutralized. At the center of it all stood Zara, but she was no longer the uncertain woman from the balcony. This was the Empress in full Imperial mode, her Aurora robes replaced by armor that seemed forged from crystallized starlight. Her crown blazed with inner fire, and her voice carried the authority of eons. "Ah, Marcus," she said without turning around. "Perfect timing. You can observe the efficiency of Imperial pacification. Protocols, Zara, what are you doing?" She spun to face him, and he saw that her stellar eyes were bright with unshed tears. "What I was born to do. What I was trained to do. What the Empire requires me to do. This isn't what you want." "Want?" She laughed, and the sound was bitter as winter wind. "Want is a luxury for those who have choices. I am the Empress. My desires are irrelevant." Nyx slithered closer, their scales shifting to triumphant gold. "The Empress has remembered her duty." They hissed in accented English. These emotional entanglements were becoming problematic. Marcus looked between them, and understanding dawned. "You've been pushing her. You've been afraid she was getting too close to actually considering our perspective." "I serve the Empire," Nyx replied smoothly. "As does the Empress. Romance is a lovely fairy tale, but reality demands more practical solutions." "Enough," Zara commanded, but her voice lacked its usual steel. "Marcus, you need to understand. I've seen what happens to species that resist Imperial guidance. Better a swift conquest than prolonged suffering." "And what about what happens to the conqueror?" Marcus asked quietly. "What happens to the person who has to live with the knowledge that they could have chosen differently?" For a moment, Zara's armor seemed to flicker, revealing the woman beneath. But then reports came in of human military units refusing to surrender, of civilians forming resistance networks, of a species that simply would not submit quietly. "They force my hand," she whispered. "They leave me no choice. There's always a choice." Marcus said, "Even if all the choices are hard ones." Zara looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw the war raging behind her eyes. Duty against desire, empire against individual, fear against love. "Not for an empress," she said finally. "Never for an empress." As she turned back to her displays, Marcus caught sight of her reflection in the darkened windows. The tears she'd been holding back were finally falling, silent and silver against her luminous skin. The woman was still there, beneath all the armor and authority, but she was losing the battle against the Empress, and Marcus was running out of time to help her remember which one she wanted to be. Dawn over Geneva brought no sun, only the ominous glow of celestial battle cruisers, positioning themselves in the atmosphere. From his hotel window, Marcus watched humanity's last free morning with a heavy heart. In 6 hours, Zara would address the world and formally announce Earth's integration into the Celestial Empire. His communicator buzzed with a message from Elena. "Emergency meeting. Safe House 7. Come alone." 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself in an abandoned cafe where Elena waited with an unexpected companion. A tall man in celestial robes whose scales shifted nervously between blue and silver. "This is Keth," Elena said quietly. "He's part of Zara's inner circle, and he has something to tell us." Keth's voice carried musical overtones that marked him as one of the Empire's administrative class. "The Empress is not acting of her own will," he said without preamble. "For the past 3 days, she has been struggling with her duties. Lord Vex has been manipulating her emotional state." "Who is Lord Vex?" Marcus asked. "Her second in command. A pure-blood celestial noble who believes emotions are a disease to be cured. He's been using psychic resonance chambers to suppress her developing attachments." Keth's scales shifted to worried amber. "But the process is breaking her. I've served the Empress for 50 years. I've never seen her in such distress." Elena leaned forward. "What kind of distress?" "She hasn't slept in days. She's been pacing her chambers, talking to herself about choices and consequences. Yesterday I found her crying over a human music recording you gave her, Marcus. She kept saying, 'I don't want to be this person anymore.'" Marcus felt his heart clench. "Where is she now?" "Preparing for the announcement. But first, Lord Vex is conducting one final clarity session to ensure she remains focused on Imperial duties." "Show us," Elena demanded. They moved through service corridors that Keth knew like a native guide, finally emerging in an observation chamber overlooking a room that made Marcus's blood run cold. Zara sat in the center of a crystalline array, her body rigid as waves of energy pulsed around her. Her face was a mask of pain, and Marcus could see her lips moving in what looked like a desperate mantra. Lord Vex stood at a control console, his form tall and angular even by celestial standards. His skin was pure silver, his eyes like frozen stars, and his voice carried the cold precision of absolute certainty. "Emotion is chaos," he intoned, and the energy waves intensified. "Duty is clarity. The Empire requires your strength, not your weakness." "I know," Zara gasped, but even through the observation barrier, Marcus could hear the doubt in her voice. "You do not know," Vex replied, adjusting the controls. "You waver, you hesitate, you allow primitive feelings to cloud your judgment. This human has infected you with sentiment." The mention of this human made Marcus step closer to the barrier. Zara's eyes snapped open, seeking something in the crystalline reflections around her. "He showed me something I'd never seen," she whispered. "Delusion," Vex said firmly. "The Empire has given you everything. Purpose, power, immortality. What could one primitive human offer that compares? Choice." Zara said, and her voice grew stronger. "He offered me the choice to be someone other than what I was bred to be." Vex's expression darkened. "Choices, an illusion for those too weak to accept their destiny. You are the Empress. You were born to rule, to conquer, to expand our domain. These feelings you experience are chemical reactions, nothing more." "Then why?" Zara asked, struggling against the energy restraints. "Do they feel more real than anything I've ever known?" Vex increased the intensity again, and Zara cried out in pain. Marcus couldn't stand it anymore. He activated the emergency release on the observation chamber and dropped down into the room. Before Elena or Keth could stop him, "That's enough," he said, stepping between Zara and the control console. Vex turned with predatory grace. "The contamination source reveals itself." "How convenient." Marcus, Zara's voice was weak but amazed. "How did you?" "I came to remind you of something," Marcus said, not taking his eyes off Vex. "You told me you'd never made a choice for yourself. Here's your chance." "She has no choices to make," Vex hissed, his hand moving to what looked like a crystalline weapon. "She is the Empress, nothing more, nothing less. She's Zara." Marcus said firmly, "She's a person who deserves the right to decide her own path, even if that path is difficult." Vex's laugh was like breaking glass. "Primitive. Romanticism. She will complete her duty, with or without your interference." "Will I?" Zara asked, and there was something new in her voice, a strength that didn't come from power or authority, but from finally understanding her own worth. The crystalline restraints shattered as Zara stood, her natural luminescence blazing brighter than the psychic dampeners could suppress. "For centuries, I've been told what I must do, what I must be, what I must sacrifice for the Empire. But no one ever asked what I wanted." "Your wants are irrelevant," Vex snarled, raising his weapon. "No," Zara said, and power rippled through the room like a physical force. My wants are the only thing that's ever been truly mine." She looked at Marcus then, and he saw not the imperial conqueror or the broken prisoner, but simply a woman making the hardest choice of her life. "I want to choose love over duty," she said. "I want to choose growth over stagnation. I want to choose possibility over certainty." "Treason," Vex breathed. But his weapon trembled in his grip. "Revolution," Zara corrected. "And it starts now." She reached for Marcus's hand, and the moment their fingers touched, something extraordinary happened. The chamber filled with warmth and light, not the cold radiance of imperial power, but something altogether more human, more real. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Zara smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it reached her eyes. "Now we see if love really can conquer stars." Outside, the celestial fleet waited for orders that would change the course of galactic history. But in that moment, Marcus only cared about the woman whose hand he held and the choice she'd finally been brave enough to make. The Empire would have to wait. Zara had found something more important than conquest. She had found herself. The command center of the celestial flagship Eternal Dawn had become a battleground of wills. Empress Zara stood at the center of the crystalline chamber, no longer wearing the armor of conquest, but simple robes that reflected her inner light. Around her, her fleet commanders waited with barely concealed tension for orders that would reshape the galaxy. Marcus stood beside her, acutely aware that he was the only human aboard a ship designed to subjugate his entire species. But Zara's hand in his gave him strength, just as his presence seemed to anchor her resolve. "Empress," Admiral Thyman spoke first, his ancient features carved from what looked like living stone. "The integration protocols are ready. Earth's governments await your final command." "I know," Zara said quietly, "and I have decided." Lord Vex, flanked by Imperial guards, stepped forward. His silver features were twisted with barely controlled rage. "If the Empress is compromised by emotional manipulation, the fleet command has protocols to ensure Imperial continuity." "Are you threatening mutiny?" Zara asked, her voice carrying the authority of eons even as her hand trembled slightly in Marcus's grip. "I am preserving the Empire from corruption," Vex replied coldly. "This human has infected you with sentiment that makes you unfit to rule." Elena Vasquez, who had been brought aboard as Earth's representative, chose that moment to speak. "With respect, Lord Vex, perhaps it's time to consider that the Empire itself might benefit from a different approach." Vex's laugh was like breaking crystal, the words of a primitive species that hasn't even achieved basic stellar travel. "Your opinion is less than worthless. That's where you're wrong," Zara said, stepping forward. The chamber's lights responded to her emotional state, growing warmer and more golden. "In 3 days among humans, I've learned more about true strength than into centuries of conquest." "Impossible," Admiral Thyman rumbled. "The Empire has brought order to chaos, civilization to barbarism. The Empire," Zara said with growing conviction, "has brought fear masquerading as order, control pretending to be civilization. I've ruled through terror for so long that I forgot there was any other way." Marcus watched as she addressed each of her commanders in turn, seeing not subjects to be controlled but individuals capable of choice. The transformation was subtle but profound, from Empress to leader, from ruler to guide. "Admiral Thyman," she said, "how many rebellions have you suppressed in your service to the Empire?" The stone-like being considered. 47 major insurrections, countless minor resistances. "And how many of those worlds truly embraced imperial rule afterward?" Thyman's silence was answer enough. "We rule through fear," Zara continued, "and wonder why love eludes us. We demand obedience and call it loyalty. We mistake submission for respect." She looked at Marcus, drawing strength from his steady presence. "But I've seen what true partnership looks like. True cooperation, true love." "Sentiment," Vex spat. "Weakness that will destroy everything we've built." "Will it?" Elena interjected smoothly. "Because from where I stand, it looks like strength. The strength to admit when something isn't working. The strength to try a different path." Keth, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "Empress, if I may, in my 50 years of service, I have watched you rule with absolute power and absolute loneliness. These past days, I have seen you discover joy is that not worth preserving, Joy is inefficient, Vex declared, but several of the commanders looked uncertain now. Is it? Zara asked. Because I've never felt more powerful than I do right now. Not the power to destroy or control, but the power to create, to build, to choose. She moved to the central command console, her fingers dancing over controls that could level civilizations. But instead of issuing orders of conquest, she opened a communication channel to the entire celestial fleet. This is Empress Zara Nethys. Her voice carried to every ship, every crew member, every world in the Empire. For too long, we have measured our strength by the fear we inspire. Today, I ask you to consider a different measure: the love we cultivate. Marcus watched as responses flooded in from across the fleet. Some were protests, demands for clarification, but others were expressions of hope from beings who had served the Empire without question but dreamed of something more. I hereby dissolve the protocols for Earth's forced integration, Zara continued. Instead, I propose something unprecedented in our history: true alliance. Partnership based on mutual respect rather than domination. Lord Vex's hand moved to his weapon, but Admiral Thymon's massive stone arm blocked him. Let her speak. The ancient commander rumbled. To my fleet commanders, to the governors of our worlds, to every citizen of the Empire, I offer you the same choice I discovered here. The choice to build rather than conquer, to inspire rather than terrorize, to love rather than merely rule. Elena smiled as diplomatic channels lit up with incoming communications from across the galaxy. Worlds that had chafed under imperial rule were responding with cautious hope. Species that had submitted from fear were tentatively expressing interest in genuine cooperation. This is impossible, Vex whispered, watching his rigid order crumble into something fluid and alive. This is evolution, Zara corrected. And it starts with one simple recognition that every being, no matter how different, deserves the right to choose their own path. She turned to Marcus then, and in her eyes he saw not the cold stars of imperial power, but the warm light of a woman who had finally discovered her own heart. Will you stay? She asked quietly. Help me learn how to rule through love instead of fear. Marcus smiled, thinking of all the impossible things that had led to this moment. For as long as you'll have me, forever, then, she said, and kissed him while starships designed for conquest began transmitting messages of peace. The revolution hadn't been won through weapons or warfare, but through the simple, radical act of one woman choosing love over duty, growth over stagnation, hope over fear. As reports came in of worlds celebrating their first taste of true freedom in centuries, as former enemies reached out with tentative offers of friendship, as the greatest empire in galactic history transformed itself from the inside out, Marcus realized something profound. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe wasn't the ability to destroy, it was the courage to change. And sometimes, love really could conquer stars. In the months that followed, the galaxy would witness the birth of something unprecedented, an empire built not on domination, but on cooperation, not on fear but on hope. Zara and Marcus would spend their lives helping to build bridges between worlds that had only known walls, but in that moment, standing together as the first messages of peace spread across the stars, they were simply two people who had found in each other the courage to choose a better path. The universe, it turned out, had been waiting for someone brave enough to suggest that conquest wasn't the only way to touch the stars. Sometimes, all it took was learning how to reach for someone else's hand.